lower bottoms of West Oakland. This is Revolution. And today, I always get excited when I get to do stuff like this. I got to go to a high school that I did not live in the area. And in that high school, I met a lot of cool people. This guest is one of those cool people. I was saying it off air, and I will definitely say it on air. She was literally the first person from Albany High to speak to me and to be nice to me. Our guest today, Dr. Kelley Fanto Deetz. Are you still the Director of Programming and Education?
Yes, I am.
She holds a BA in Africana Studies and History from the College of William and Mary, and an MA in African American Studies, and a Ph.D. in African Diaspora Studies from the University of California, Berkeley. Dr. Deetz works as a historical consultant for several museum sites throughout the Mid-Atlantic. She partnered with the National Geographic to work on projects related to Nat Turner. Her work is highlighted in National Geographic's documentary film Rise Up, The Legacy of Nat Turner. And she wrote the cover story for the National Geographic History Magazine entitled Nat Turner's Bones, Reclaiming the American Rebel. She is the author of the critically acclaimed book, Bound to the Fire, How Virginia's Enslaved Cooks Helped Invent American Cuisine, which was named as one of the top 10 books on food in 2017 by the Smithsonian Magazine. Yes, this young lady was the first person to say hello to me.
I love it.
at Albany High. Kelley Fanto Deetz, welcome to This is Revolution.
Thank you for having me. I love the memory that you have because, I guess I was a senior. Were you a freshman or a sophomore? How much?
I was a sophomore. I'm a sophomore 2 years ago.
Okay, so I also transferred into Albany from Berkeley my 10th grade year, and I didn't know anybody there. And so maybe that's part of why, when I saw a new face, I was like, oh man, like this dude's about to go through some cultural shock here. So let me welcome you to this weird little bubble. But that's dope that you remember that. And thank you for the intro.
No. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me. This has been a long time coming. I think I reached out to you. I feel like I reached out to you when your book dropped.
Yeah.
I reached out to you a while back. I've been following a lot of the things you've been doing because it's been very, very interesting to me. It's first of all, it's been interesting to see what a lot of people from our school from the time that we were there have done with their lives.
Right.
Like
there's a lot of different paths. You can say that.
Yeah. And you, for some reason, kind of, I think you go under the radar of a lot of the bigger names from our school for whatever reason. Now, I believe you worked on, I can't remember the brother's name, but the Nat Turner movie, Birth of a Nation?
Yes, yeah, with Nate Parker, definitely.
Nate Parker.
So I was introduced to him through the guy that was making the sets for the film. And part of my training in African American Studies is in material culture and slavery in particular. And so I was literally on the phone with the guy making the sets for the whole month they were down there, filming that. And sort of making sure that he had the right things in the slave quarters and the objects and all the artifacts. And through that work, I was introduced to Nate shortly afterwards. And that's when we decided to start working on the documentary. And, my life completely changed from that moment. Nat Turner's story, his history, his legacy consumed me. And I became really tethered to the story of not just his liberation story, but to other stories of African descendant people fighting for their rights. I mean, I had already had a background and passion for those histories, but Nat Turner really pulled me in a way that I hadn't been before.
Why Nat Turner?
So I grew up in Berkeley and then, of course, Albany, as we just said. And, the Black history we got in schools out there was pretty much 20th century. I could talk about Bobby Seale. I could go on about the Black Panthers, about SNCC, all those things. That was very much baked into our K through 12 education. But when it came to the earlier stuff, the roots of systematic racism, the roots of the issues that we see today, I didn't really have a bearing on that. And so when I went out to Virginia and I found myself at a very conservative, predominantly white college at William & Mary, I started taking some African American history classes, and that's when I decided to major in Africana studies. And the work and the sort of studies that I did there and what I was exposed to is that longer history of Black, revolutionary thought. And Nat Turner was very much an anchor in that older narrative. So, 1831 in Virginia was a very turbulent time. Nat Turner's choice to fight against the system of enslavement and lead a revolution of sorts really transformed not just the way in which enslaved people sort of existed during that period, but it also was the first spark of the Civil War. So for me, thinking about someone like Nat Turner, who has that revolutionary history, in truth, but then is branded as this, sort of, villain who killed women and children. And you go down to Southampton County where this occurred, and literally the folks down there talk as if it happened last week. So for me, it is Nat Turner pulled that older history into the present in ways I wasn't even aware of, right? Like I didn't feel that lingering sort of fear of Black violence as I did when I started talking to people about his history and legacy.
I enjoyed the movie, Birth of a Nation. I remember seeing the trailer a long time before the movie dropped, and I had to wait to watch it on I think I saw it on satellite when it hit there. Did it miss the theaters? Wasn't there some drama behind it?
There was drama. There was a little bit of a scandal that came out. I think it was in August. The film was coming out in October, and a lot of theaters pulled it. It was also right before the 2016 election, so there was just a lot of sort of uncomfort in the air generally, but it did hit theaters. Not as many as it was supposed to. I mean, it won Sundance, best of, etc. But, by the time all that happened, it didn't really excel the way that I think we all hoped it would have.
Oh, no, it broke my heart because I remember seeing the trailer, and I don't know if the trailer came out around you said Sundance it won a bunch of awards?
Yeah, Sundance it won a bunch of awards, and I think the trailer started being aired shortly after, I want to say.
And it was a powerful trailer. I should link the trailer.
Mm-hmm.
Link the trailer in this description. Very, very, very powerful trailer. And then the title, Birth of a Nation, for anyone that's ever seen or even seen clips of the D.W. Griffith movie Birth of a Nation, which is literally about the rise of the Ku Klux Klan. This movie I was like, oh, wow, you took the title. You're telling the story of Nat Turner, which is a story that not a lot to your point, not a lot of us know.
Mm-hmm.
And then it almost kind of disappears, and it really kind of hurt my feelings.
Yeah, no, I think it hurt a lot of us that were so wed to the idea of introducing to Nat Turner to the world, to really contextualizing him in a way that, gives people a sense of pride in their ancestors. That's something that I, in the work that I've done in teaching and in my scholarship, really trying to reach back and bring the stories of hope and survival and revolution and pride out of those archives. And that's something that I think Nat Turner, even though there was violence involved, I mean, there was violence in our forefathers founding this country. There was violence at Jamestown in 1607. Violence is very much part of the American fabric, and it is accepted and celebrated when that violence is white. And it is not even labeled as violence when the violence is white. However, if a person of African descent, and especially if you think about those who were enslaved, who had every reason, right, to evoke violence, that kind of violence is seen as terrorism. And that's something that I think we're still dealing with now.
Do you feel like, because this is also going on around the same time that Colin Kaepernick is doing the extremely benign gesture of kneeling, like I feel very bad for the brother because he lost his career, and that's effed up. I am a football fan. It is my flaw, if you will. and not a Niner fan, but still, it was
Thank God.
sad that he. I mean, when you go as far as to be like asking a green, can you imagine a Black Panther like asking a conservative like, what would you mind us doing that wouldn't
Right.
upset you at all and make you feel comfortable with me being uncomfortable with getting the shit kicked out of me by the police? Like the
Right.
fact that he did that, like went that far to do that and still got the pushback that he did, and that's going on, and that's viewed as like this extreme act of rebellion to frickin' kneel, which is not an act of rebellion.
Right.
Like,
right. And now a lot of the conservatives are like, well, if they would just do something peacefully, it'd be fine. It's like, whoa, bro. Like, look back a couple years.
you destroyed that man's career for
Yep.
kneeling. Do you feel like that had anything to do with the pushback on the movie? Because like you said, it's 2016. It's a big election year where for most Americans, I shouldn't say most Americans, for coastal Americans, they're not seeing the divide that was already there.
Right.
I've spent a lot of years traveling through this lovely land of ours in your city of Lynchburg. I definitely have some stories to tell about being in Lynchburg.
I bet.
They're actually kind of funny. Do you think that was another reason why studios were like, this is going to be a tough one to deal with because we have a polarizing figure rising up in Trump and people are getting mad about this cat kneeling, and you just can't have a movie about literal slaves killing their masters?
Yeah, I think that was part of it. And the funny thing is we were all expecting that pushback. And when it went to Sundance, it was one of those moments where it was like, wow, it's accepted. Like, this is amazing, right? Like, and then when it won, it was almost like a validation of like, maybe America is ready for this story. Maybe, white folks will come out and see this. Of course, Sundance is definitely not your typical white folk sort of gathering. But, I think some of those sort of, some of that fear was a little bit reduced. But then I think, as the time went on, as Trump became more and more sort of aggressively racist in the public, and sort of those sentiments were really sort of taking a hold of America. And then when the allegations broke in August, it took the wind out of the sail. The white folks that were going to be brave and support this, pulled back because of also the Me Too movement that was happening. I mean, it was really a perfect storm of criticism that, sort of took over that story and kept Nat Turner from getting the stage he needed at that moment.
That's a whole nother episode, right?
It is.
How do we reckon with certain issues in the middle of the Me Too movement?
Right, and
which
the
also
intersections of race and gender and all of those things. I mean, it really. What's funny about this, and then we can move on to the next topic, but everything was pretty cool with Nate Parker until certain people found out through Googling him that his wife was white. And that's, if you look back at the records, that's when the fire started. And I'll just leave it right there. So yeah, another episode, but there was a lot packed into that particular moment.
Well, we can still talk. It's my show, so we can still talk about it. I give a shit. My show. And listeners support it, so they want to hear the fucking drama about do with it. So just for white people that listen, and there is quite a few white people that listen, if you talk big black shit, you're not allowed to have a white wife. You might be able to have like a Latin, maybe an Asian. Maybe. But if you can't take your wife to the black mall, if your wife uses a different brush,
then Yep. And there's such a long history of trauma with that as well. I mean, going back, I mean, talking about Birth of a Nation, the original film, the lynchings, all of the Black men, the innocent Black men who were literally executed, hanged by white mobs, it was all based on them supposedly, looking at a white woman or raping a white woman. And those claims were all false. It was an excuse to literally murder and execute people of African descent, especially African Americans. So there's that. There's all the trauma of slavery built into that. There's, all of the beauty standards and the double standards of, straight hair versus curly hair, the whole bit. I mean, there's just so much wrapped into that. And, just the fact that in America, since day one, right? Since 1619, if we're talking about the British US, African descendant women have really been at the terms of who's seen as most worthy. And so, that long history of really created this now where, all of that's baked into the anger and the upset to see a Black man who is very proud to be Black and, as you said, saying big Black things, than having a white wife. I think that there are some serious, deep stings that come with that. And so, I'm not saying that you should be with whoever you are, but like, because of that intergenerational trauma and this sort of machine of white supremacy, I think it hurts a little bit more.
And I am totally joking about, you can totally have a white wife. I don't know.
I mean,
I'm joking. I don't want anyone to think, I don't want anyone to listen to this and be like, he doesn't want to, like, no white wives. They're
Right. But just explaining sort of that, the perspective and where that anger comes from. It's pretty deeply rooted in this country.
It is. And that's a thing for there's a good amount of Black celebrities that I think Jordan Peele has a white wife.
Okay.
I think. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. I will most likely be wrong again, but I want to say he has one. And whenever that happens, it's almost like people belittle whatever your message is.
Right.
Because it's kind of like a sleeping with the enemy type vibe you get. Which is, to me, is silly. Like, really? He didn't marry like Paris Hilton. Like, it's just like a regular ass white lady.
It's not that kind of white chick.
Yeah, like, that'd be a different thing if he was married to like Chelsea Clinton, and you'd be like, well, your movie might be some bullshit because you literally. But yeah, until that happens, like, I give a shit. It's just regular.
So true.
So you wrote a book.
Yep.
Which is a huge feat in my opinion. I'm always fascinated by people that I went to school with that wrote a book, because it's always like, wow, you wrote a book.
It's just a bunch of college papers sewn together. I mean, it's,
and not just a book, but your book it won some awards, didn't it?
It got a bunch of like sort of accolades, but didn't win any awards. So typically books of that length, it's a book that you could literally sit down and read in a day, which it was intentional that way. A lot of presses I was talking to when I was looking for a press were like, oh, you have to double the size of it and then it'll contend for awards. I wasn't into, first of all, I didn't write it to get an award. I wrote it to bring the stories of enslaved chefs into the light so people can understand who they actually were and what their legacy is. But, for me, I also wanted a book that people would actually read, even scholars. I mean, I'm a Ph.D. I was in academia for over 10 years. Most of my colleagues wouldn't read a book from start to finish. So I actually wanted a book, one, that was not too long, so you could actually read the whole thing, and two, was written so anyone could read it, a high school graduate or a middle schooler, all the way up to someone with a PhD. And so that kind of popular writing that's written for consumption and not sort of posturing typically doesn't win awards. But I got a lot of, best ofs from different food magazines, and Smithsonian was one of my favorite. But I feel really good about what I put out. And, again, awards don't matter to me. People are reading it and it's selling like crazy. So that's another wonderful
Oh,
plus.
that's definitely wonderful. But it's not a cookbook, unfortunately.
No, it's not. People think
I
it
was
is. Which is
hoping it was. I
hilarious.
was hoping it was a cookbook, and I think in one of our conversations, you were like, "It's not a cookbook."
Exactly.
I was like, well,
People
fuck
think
you,
it's
then.
about cooks. It's not a cookbook.
I don't want to read. I don't want to see words. I need portions.
Yeah. And
Damn
good luck
it.
with that too. Those colonial recipes are like milk, eggs, flour. Like that's the recipe.
Now there is a man that actually wrote a cookbook about that. I don't want to call it slave food. Is there a term to use?
The food of the enslaved, or African American foodways, or
Yeah, I just don't like soul food.
right.
I don't know if I told you I worked in the Gulf of Mexico for a while cooking. Right? That is
Interesting.
the perfect response for where we're from to that job. That is like the most perfect. If you ever want to hear there's a response I always get from people that I grew up with. It's always, "Oh, really?"
That's like, you live in Lynchburg? Oh.
Yeah,
okay.
like, "Oh, really? Oh,
Nice. How's that going for you?
That's exactly how I felt when I was there, and they made me feel that way. But it was the first and it was a few years ago. It was like 07, 08. And but it was before grits was like hot.
Okay. Got
Like
you.
now you can get grits anywhere now. And I remember back in my day, I remember when you couldn't just go to anywhere and get like grits.
It's true.
And one of my jobs was I had to cook breakfast, and they were like, "You have to make grits," and I was like, "But there's only white people here." And they looked at me like, "Yeah, you have to make grits." I was like, "But they don't eat that. Like, I grew up around white people. They don't know what a grit is." And he's like, "Look,
you grew up
man."
in the Bay. That's why.
Yeah, they were like, "Look, man, we're not really gonna ask you again, goddamn it." And I remember sitting there in awe. I watched white people fuck up a watermelon. I had never seen that shit before in my life.
Like Southern food is the quote soul food, and white folks tear it up. I mean, that's what they grew up eating, 100%.
Yeah. And it's so funny because, here it's like, oh, we're going to go to the soul food spot because there's a real black person there with a Southern accent that cooks.
Right.
Ergo, it's soul food. It's more soul-y. So good we might lose a foot. It's like
I'm dead.
That's
oh my god.
It's true.
It is. Oh my god.
But
funny.
so watching, so I don't like to use the term soul food. So
Right.
because of that, it just fucked my whole world up. And I was like, wait a minute here. You tell me that these white people are going to eat grits. And I remember sitting there just staring, and they're staring back at me like, what the fuck is wrong with the guy from California? He acts like he ain't never seen nobody eat before. Like, I've never seen anybody eat like that before.
The South is a trip. I mean, I've been here now almost half my life, which is kind of crazy, but you learn, you meet new kinds of white folks out here. That's for sure.
You do. Because I didn't know white people could have bad credit till I went to the South. I didn't know a lot. I went to the South. I was like, oh, shit. I was like,
Bay Area is a weird bubble to grow up in, though. I'm telling you, like, you just don't, like, a bubble's, I think, an understatement. Like, you really don't understand what's outside of that space.
We didn't just grow up in the Bay Area. Also, you have to extrapolate this. We went to school in a small town outside of Berkeley, which is not even that big of a city.
Right.
That's 1 square mile.
End, but yeah.
Right, of like these kind of not elites, but upper middle class.
Oh,
what do they call it? The professional,
like
professional managerial class. Yeah, that's Albany in a nutshell.
No, it's bougie as hell. It's like, yeah, no, Albany was different, is different. Apparently, Berkeley now is like this crazy gentrified majority, like rich white people city, which also blows my mind because that's not the Berkeley I grew up in at all. So that's pretty trippy.
I mean, it's always, if you think about it, you have this major campus. It's always the #1 public university in the nation.
Right.
So you constantly have scholars coming in to write their great
Right.
thesis, and they're bringing their families there. So to me, Berkeley has always kind of been this place where you're going to get a certain level of academia there, that you're probably going to interact with their children in some capacity, especially because the student housing for that was like right by where we went to high school. So we're going
That's
to
true.
school with these people.
Right.
And when you get out of that bubble, you're like, oh shit. Cause you live in California. You don't go to the other part. You don't go to Riverside when you live in the Bay Area. Like, you live in LA, you're not hanging out in Bakersfield.
Right.
That's just not how it works. Like, we're not, let's go down to Stockton and go have a bonfire. Like, that's just not how the Bay Area works. So going to places like, in my travels, like Lynchburg and fucking, where else in Virginia was I? Richmond, Virginia. That's the America, back to what we were saying earlier, where in 2016, before that, you saw why a figure like Trump could rise to power,
right?
As the Democratic Party was just kind of ignoring everyone else, in the middle of the country, and just addressing, even with his bullshit promises, he was still at least acknowledging their existence,
right?
Which was so crazy. But back to The Food of the Enslaved,
the book.
The book, which is not a cookbook, which I'm mildly upset by. What are all these words? Inventing American cuisine. So a big reason why I did go to the South, all jokes aside, besides needing money, I wanted to know if the food that I was making in California, just for my family, was good enough. So I figured if I go to the deepest part of the South, I could learn something, which I did, and see if what I was doing was any good. And I did look at it as like truly American cuisine. Mm-hmm. In writing this book and kind of going back and doing all that insane research you were doing, what did you find with the way stuff was prepared back then compared to now? Yeah,
so God, it's completely different. And the book really focuses on plantation cooks at larger plantations. So we're talking about plantations that, had an external kitchen, that, had a couple hundred, enslaved people working in the fields, and a gigantic dining room. I mean, they're really wealthy early Americans that were really defining what American food was, because they were the ones that were presenting this new kind of food to heads of state from all over Europe, etc. So one of the many things I found, and I'll keep going here, but there's this whole sort of idea that somehow, if you're working in the house, right, if you're an enslaved domestic person, or as some say, a house slave, that somehow you are this loyal, being that is all about like being an Uncle Tom and being loyal to that white family. And that narrative is actually completely false. And so through all of my research, which cumulatively was about 10 years, I found so many cases of everything from poisoning to conjuring the ancestors, putting spells on the white family from the cook, having to cook all the food for these huge dinner parties. So back in the day, let's just say the 18th century, 1700s, if you were to go to, say, Thomas Jefferson's house or James Madison or any one of these, or the Lees for that matter, any one of these very wealthy early, founding fathers, if you would have gone to one of their houses for dinner, you would have had a 3-course meal. Each course would have had anywhere from, 5 to 9 things on the table, and you would have been eating for hours. And if anyone has worked in a kitchen, which I did for a very long time, and you look at one of those menus, you realize how much work that took the enslaved cook in that kitchen. That was not, some beautiful Chez Panisse, bougie ass, 21st century kitchen. I'm talking about a big ass fireplace with a bunch of cast iron pots. So creating the kind of cuisine that literally would pass today as an elegant meal on literal coals and flame in a brick building, working 16, 18 hours a day. That's something that I think really struck me, was the kind of labor that went into those meals and the skills also that went into those meals.
I was watching, this is before I knew about your book, Henry Louis Gates. Do you know him? Okay. Is he a friend of yours?
No, but I know his work. I
I know
would
all
love
you
to meet
smart
him at
people.
some point. He's like one of those old G's, but
He is. But he's also got pretty successful with his documentaries. But he did a documentary, I forget which one he did. And he had a guy actually make a whole meal. I can't remember the name
Michael
of it.
Twitty?
Yes.
Yeah, the cooking gene. Yeah, Michael Twitty's a friend of mine.
Now he wrote a cookbook, right?
He has more recipes in it than mine does. So we were actually we literally started doing our projects at the same exact time, and both books came out in 2017, which was pretty cool. But yeah, so he has a ton of recipes in his book. It's also very heavily autobiographical. I can't talk. Autobiographical. So it's like a little, it's some history generally. It's some history of his families, and then a lot of recipes. So it's a different take. But yeah, there's definitely recipes in there.
What is it like going from where we're from in the Bay Area to a place that literally gives tours of plantations?
Well, I first came out here when I was 17 on a visit with my dad, and I can't even tell you the culture shock that I experienced. It was, I really felt like I was in, we were in rural Virginia at that point. He brought me down to this plantation, Flower 200, 17th century plantation complex. And, I had grown up in Berkeley until I was 15. And then, we moved to Albany, where it was, again, we just talked about how it was really different. But, I grew up in a racially mixed family. I grew up in a very progressive home. I grew up in an area that didn't even talk about slavery. It's kind of like, okay, that happened a long time ago. We're all talking about 20th century narratives here. When I went to that plantation and I went to have dinner at the plantation owner's house, my dad was an archaeologist. He was digging up the archaeological sites there. And we went to the plantation owner's house, and literally we were driving past slave quarters where they still had African-American workers living in. We went to this house, and I sat down in this house, and like literally like an African-American woman came out dressed up. It was like Aunt Jemima was cooking for me. It was the most twisted, disturbing, like, Key and Peele type of movie scene, like Get Out kind of thing I'd ever seen. And it shook me. It shook me to the core. And I came back, and I ended up moving out there 2 years later. And that's when I started studying African-American history, the earlier stuff. But it was completely insane to me that kind of sort of, relationship. And again, of course, those people were not enslaved, but they were living on the literal plantation that their ancestors were enslaved on, working for the same family that enslaved their ancestors. And that to me, that sort of frozen moment in time really just blew my brain. Like, I couldn't believe it was happening still. And that was one plantation in the entire South. And so, now my position is at Stratford Hall, which is the birthplace of Robert E. Lee. And they hired me there after the incident happened in Charlottesville to come fix their narrative, because before I got there, they weren't talking about the enslaved community. They weren't talking about slavery. And now, I brought not only my UC Berkeley credentials, but I grew up in Berkeley sort of approach to this, and the tour is completely different. But I would say that we are an exception. There's only a few places I can think of that are actually dealing with the narrative of slavery with integrity, dealing with the narratives of slavery in a way that brings their stories to life, that integrates it within the main tour, and leaves people with a better understanding and a sense of empathy and understanding as well of, what those people had to go through to literally build our country. So for me, I wouldn't want to be anywhere else. I went back there for grad school. I came back out here right afterwards. And, I see the rest of my life, I'm going to be working in the South, in these plantations, doing this kind of work because it needs to be done. And, people weren't doing it at the level it needed to be, until recently.
Now, How far are you from Charlottesville?
An hour.
Were you there during the protest at all?
I was not. Having grown up in Berkeley and having literally been taught how to protest from my K through, I would say 9 teachers, because I transferred in 10th grade. And, my parents were very politically active. I had been, oh my God, when Rodney King happened, I was in high school. I mean, you go to these marches and shit pops off fast. And I had a feeling, because that Klan rally, for lack of a better phrase, was planned for months. And I knew it was going to pop off. And, I'm in my 40s. I have a kid. My sort of protest, my activism now is through giving lectures and education. It is not being at the front lines anymore. I spent enough time there, but I knew it was going to get crazy. So I got up that morning and I turned on the news and I watched it happen. And I knew it was going to happen, because if you've ever been, on Telegraph when there were riots back in the day, or anywhere for that matter, when things just take that turn, you feel it like in your spine. And I felt it while watching that. And I felt like I was there because I've spent so much time in Charlottesville, and it was literally right up the road for me.
Now, a lot of us or a lot of people that listen to the show that aren't from the South kind of don't understand the amount of monuments that are there of Confederate soldiers, and that narrative that the daughters of the Confederacy bestowed upon the Southern generations definitely worked. Where the Confederate flag is not a flag of racism and hate or even sedition. It's a flag of, pride, right?
Heritage.
I'm sure
heritage, not hate, right?
That's literally a saying out there. The Civil War is about states' rights.
Northern aggression. It's the war of Northern aggression. They were just chilling down here until that North came down and messed everything up.
Messed everything up because it was about states' rights. The states' rights to own slaves, but it was about states' rights.
Yeah, exactly. They always forget the second half of that sentence. It's like, keep going. There's no period there, buddy. Just keep going.
And so, and I know people with that flag tattooed on them. It's and they don't, and again, there's a narrative that has been taught there for some time, and not everybody knows that those monuments were erected. I think people think like right after the Civil War, right? Like that was a good time you built this statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest. That was right after you did it, right? So being there and having to see these just fucking annoying monuments to, I shouldn't say annoying because that's even these disgusting monuments, and you depending on what state you're in, they still fly the Confederate flag over the state capitol building. I worked also in North Dakota with more Southern cooks cooking again. And one of the guys I worked with was from Mississippi. And I remember he talked about that flag and how it just pissed him off that motherfuckers fly that flag. And he didn't curse. He was a very religious man. He was like, they fly that fucking flag. And so to know the pain that shit causes people to this day, because it's really like a know your place flag. It's all kinds of, there's all kind of connotations in these monuments and these flags. And I've never in my 43 years of life walked by these local monuments, not like Rushmore.
Right.
We're talking about these statues of who the fuck ever. I've never walked by one and sat and looked at my child and was like, child, this great statue standing here on the middle of fucking Main Street, and never. And the people that got mad about that, I was like, this is bullshit, because you didn't give a fuck about that statue in the first place.
They didn't at all until they started getting toppled or messed with. Yep.
Yeah. This has nothing to do with the statue. This has more to do with a reckoning, a changing of the guard for most people. I think that's what they see it as. And people are frightened. And I think a lot of those fears become based in these images where in my soul, I think these fears are probably more economic.
Right.
You know, because you can't just be mediocre and fall into a union job anymore.
True. That is so true.
And you didn't have to be the most wonderful motherfucker in the world to get like a decent job and buy a house. Like your dad could be average as shit. And he's a homeowner and he had a family. You guys went on vacation. You and your average ass daddy.
It's so true. Those days are gone.
They're gone.
Yep.
And so I feel like it's a lot of just really average and below average mothers. It's like the C students of right-wing rebellion are mad.
Yep.
And they're taking it out on the wrong thing. So you're there. You see these protests probably via the news, and I'm sure there's all the scuttlebutt in town.
Right.
Because you're in a college town. There's a major university there. What was before everything did pop off? What was your feeling
about the flag? There's a couple of things. First of all, that flag was one of so many flags during, of the Confederacy, and they chose, the people that fly that now for the heritage reasons. Literally, that flag was chosen by the Klan during the first rise of the Klan to intimidate African Americans. So, that flag needs to get burned and put away. We won that war. It's over. The monuments, I thought before all this stuff started happening, I had a bit of a nuanced view on this. So for me, it was evidence, not that we need it, because I think there's a lot of evidence there, but evidence of the state sanctioned racism that you see throughout the country. And, and it's not even just a Southern thing. There are horrible, like advocates and creators of eugenics throughout the North as well. Doctors that literally practiced on enslaved African women, they have statues in places like New York. So statues of despicable white men are littering this country. And so for me, it was more of like, okay, if we're going to take those down or critique those, let's really be broader than that. Let's look at the other statues that also really show that the state and the nation has sanctified these white supremacists in ways that I think we need to reconsider. So, I like to I think that the Confederate thing is an easy cut. There was a war, they lost, those monuments went up decades after the war ended. But I think that we need to look at other things as well. There's buildings that, all over the place, and schools and colleges and universities named after really disgusting Americans. And at some point, we need to sort of, reckon with that history. What does it mean to have these people graduate from business schools and from, law schools that are named after white supremacists, sexist, people that literally spent their entire careers practicing white supremacy within the system. So I think, it's bigger than just the Confederate monuments. I think that that's an easy way to go. What I actually love right now is, I don't know if you've seen it or not, but the Robert E. Lee Monument in Richmond has become this absolutely phenomenal space of discourse. So you go there, the monument is still there. It's gigantic, but, all of the Black Lives Matter and all the different protest groups have come and they paint it. They paint it every day. They paint, different people's names on it, Breonna Taylor, whomever, and they've got a sort of community around that statue that never was there before. So what was once only a year ago, this gigantic, statue with, tulips all around it, now is this space of community and activism and conversations. And for me, I think that monument is actually in better use now than it ever was, because people drove past that statue and didn't give a fuck who it was. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, whatever, another white guy. Like, we see them everywhere we go. They're all over the country. They're all over the Capitol, right? But I think once attention was brought to that statue, it became a ground zero for conversations that need to happen about race, about inequality, about, all of the issues that we're dealing with in 2021. So I'm happy that those statues were there to have those kinds of conversations, but I do think we need to pull back and be a little bit more critical of all of them and not just the Southern ones.
So what is your take? Because, the right wing, or I don't want to say the right. Yeah, I guess it's the right wing talking point is kind of like, well, hey, it's slippery slope. If you think Robert E. Lee is bad, if you think Nathan Forrest is bad, if you think insert Confederate general here is bad, then Abe Lincoln is next. And there literally is a petition, I believe, to either remove a statue of Lincoln in Wisconsin.
I'm sure there is.
And George Washington, Thomas Jefferson.
Mm-hmm.
Where does it end with you people? So what is your take on that?
My take on that is there's two things. The first thing that I thought of was, of course, any Confederate fought against the United States of America. They were terrorists and they betrayed us. And so that's a pretty easy line to draw. That's not something you could say about our founding fathers with all their flaws. That's not something that you can say about Abe Lincoln, who literally brought us together. That said, I think that we do need to be more critical. And I think that America is a slippery slope because we have these ideals that are baked into the Constitution. We have these ideals that are baked into the fabric of this country. That is the idea of an equitable, a country that is for freedom and equity for all, when in reality, we've far been from that the entire time of our history. So I think at some point, we can look at the Confederate statues and look at them in the context of what they did to fight against the United States of America. So nation can come first there. But when it comes to looking at people like George Washington and Abe Lincoln and others, they were very important to this country. And we can talk about their importance and their significance and respect them for the ideas that they brought to build this country, but also be critical of them for their absolute broken moral character. And that's something that I would say, Americans are really, really bad at doing, whether you're far left or far right, looking at somebody as a nuanced person, understanding that all heroes have flaws, but you can't throw away, what those forefathers did, because that is very important to the history of this country. At the same time, they had some serious flaws, and we need to be able to acknowledge both. And I think once Americans can start thinking in that gray area, we'll be more informed voters, we'll be better activists, and we'll understand who we are as a country more than we have before, because everything is so polarized, whether it's your view on Jefferson, Robert E. Lee, or Trump versus Biden.
Mm-hmm. Do you think it's just, there was I don't know if you follow Zero Books at all, but they had a thing on, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but basically he was a leftist thinker that kind of had a few right-wingish views in the 60s and 70s, but basically his view on education was that the public school system had kind of stopped teaching critical thought. And there was like this divide along like more so class lines that you kind of learned enough to operate machinery.
You know what? I'm very interested in what that person has to say, because I would agree to a certain extent, as being someone who was a college professor for 10 years, and I got the students when they got to college, so they definitely did pretty well in high school. And they still had an inability to think critically. And I think the standardized the testing system in this country has also ruined any last fiber of critical thinking skills that they might have somehow held on to. They're gone. And I think that that's hurt our country. The fact that 48% of our fellow voting Americans voted for somebody who literally disrespects our Constitution and is an egomaniac says a lot about our educational system and where it's been and where it needs to go.
Or does it say more about how successful pro wrestling is? Because I believe that Donald Trump is just pro wrestling personified, and
it's true.
Everything about
and just
him.
The celebrity. Why is Kim Kardashian? Why the fuck is she in my news feed? I don't watch reality TV, right? Like America had some serious beasts to deal with. And, those are symptoms of, I think a bigger problem. Why do we love celebrities so much? And I mean the royal weeks. It sure the hell isn't me.
Yeah. I've definitely heard people have their takes on that are much smarter than me, and they take it back a long, long way about there was a time where people had to do great things before you were a celebrity. Write a great novel,
Right.
journey across seas,
Right.
climb a freaking mountain that no one had climbed. And then it was like, well, they were in the movie and they looked pretty, and that was enough for me.
Oh
I'm
God,
sold.
yeah.
And
And then
that's
reality TV, right? And then social
oh
media
God,
broke
fast
everything.
forward to that, and that's a whole other. We could spend another hour and a half talking just about the celebrity culture and how it's kind of destroyed. To me, a certain fabric of this nation, because we not only had a president that was in movies. That's the second president we've had that was in movies.
Right. Yep. No, it's true. Right? Would Reagan have gotten elected if he wasn't a California movie star?
Like there's and then how many governors have we had in the country? Jesse Ventura won multiple terms as a governor of Minnesota. I think he won multiple terms.
Oh yes, Jesse Ventura, whatever his name was. My dog is barking.
That's okay. I can't hear it. Him, her, it.
Should we pause it while I get her out of the room,
or? Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, hold on. She's being really annoying. Hold on.
Mm-hmm.
Come on, dog. Okay.
You back?
Yes, sorry. She'd been squealing the whole time, and she finally started barking. And when she goes,
no, it's totally fine. I have a library of my own music I can play. So I'll tell you, because it's getting late. I know you have things to do, but I do want to tell you this Lynchburg story, and I don't think I've ever told you this story because this is my first time talking to you. It's really not. It's not that bad. So there's a pizza place somewhere in town that used to have shows. I don't know.
Pizza. It's like literally.
Yes.
Blocks away from my house.
That's what it's called. No shit. Thank you for reminding me. I couldn't think of the name. I've played like from 2011 or so. We were playing like 100 shows a year. So wow. I don't remember every place.
Right.
But I do remember this because I think this is a funny story. And I'm telling this story on air. And if you guys have a problem with it, then you can definitely leave a comment and tell me, please don't tell your shitty tour stories. But fuck you, I'm telling the shitty tour story. So I toured with my now ex for years, and we were in Lynchburg, Virginia, and we had just come from like Norfolk, and we had kind of a shitty show in this really weird coffee shop that we were way too loud for. Like they thought we were going to be like this acoustic duo that was cute.
Stop.
And we come in with like amps, and she were like, "Hey, dude, we're going to blow these people out. If you're trying to do your homework," like someone actually had come up to us and were like, "Can you please turn it down?" And I'm like, "Are you fucking shitting me?" So anyway, we go and the next night we're at the pizza place. So we're like, how shitty can it get? But it was more of a punky place. They were used to having shows.
Yeah.
It was a good show. I want to say this is like 2011, 2012. I can't remember the exact.
Here. See, that bums me out that I could have like walked over and been like, "Oh my God, look." Go ahead.
I'm surprised somebody told you like, "Oh, there's a colored guy and this Asian chick were here loud as shit." They were so loud. So we go there and we're all excited because they like fed us, and we're broke because we're broke. And a woman that worked there was like, "If you guys need a place to stay tonight, you can stay with me." And she was getting her house remodeled, and she had this really nice house. But I think she was divorced, and she was marrying some new guy that actually had money, and he was some sort of tour manager.
Oh God.
I want to say he was like a tour manager for like Jay-Z or somebody like that. It was a weird situation, but this was a really nice house. So I was going to believe what she was saying about this guy, but it was older. So jokingly, here I am in the birthplace of America. I say, is this place haunted? And she kind of looks over. She goes, no, I don't think so.
Mm.
And I was like, wow, you answered that question the way I didn't want you to answer that question. I wanted you to giggle and go,
Just
oh,
sleep in that
no.
creepy ass room over there and I'll see you never.
Yeah, she was like, well, I haven't seen anything lately. You know, like that's not the response I want because I'm scared. I'm like Don Knotts when it comes to
Right?
ghosts. Everything that happened, I'm like, oh. So she had these kids from a previous relationship, and they're staying with their father this night. I think we got there on a weekend, and so she's like, my kids aren't here. You can stay in my daughter's room, and we're staying in the obviously little girl's room. There's doll houses and all the cute little girl shit.
Of course, there's dolls. Go ahead.
And so we're chilling in this room, and it's late. You know, we played the show. We're hanging out with this cool lady, and we're so thankful to have a bed to sleep in. So after we say our good nights, we get in this bed, and we hear this weird noise. It's going like, and my ex like elbows me. She's like, "Do you hear that noise?" I'm like, "What noise?" And he just, and I'm like, "What the fuck is that?" I turn the light on, and I'm like, we're looking around for what the fuck it could be, and I'm terrified at this point. We're both terrified. The only difference is my ex could sleep through fucking anything. And she was like, all right, my man, even if it's haunted, got to catch some Z's. We got a long drive tomorrow. She put on the sleep mask. Motherfucker was out. So I couldn't sleep all night. All I hear is it's like all I hear.
Oh no, it's those damn dolls.
Close.
Oh no.
So I'm terrified. And then also I turn into like a child when I'm staying at someone's house, and I'm afraid to like get up. Like if I stayed at your house, I would stay asleep until you woke. Like I would pretend I was asleep until you woke up. Like, okay, it's okay to get up.
Oh my god.
Because I'm weird. I was like creeping around my house. Like, what are you doing? I just had to pee. Hold it. And so the woman finally wakes up, and she's like, oh, how'd you guys sleep? And we're like, you lied to us. Your house is haunted, and that's kind of fucked up.
Yeah.
And she's like, what do you mean? You know, now she's kind of shocked. Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Because this is my kid's room. So you're trying to say my kid, you know? So she goes in there, and we're like, do you hear it? And she goes, and you hear the rah, 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 and she's like, oh, I hear it. And she immediately just starts ripping through stuff. She's looking under the bed. She's looking. It was the Barbie dollhouse. The battery was dying in her Barbie toilet that made a sound when it flushed.
Oh my god.
And something was sitting on top of the little handle that caused the toilet to flush.
Oh my
and that
god.
was the sound of the dying flushing sound of the Barbie toilet.
First of all, my mind is blown that there's a thing called a Barbie toilet, and I never had one. Like, I'm just open right now just because, but oh my god.
It was like the toilet in the dollhouse. And that's what it was. That's what scared the shit for forever. I will remember Lynchburg because of the pizza place.
That is so
and that house.
Oh my god.
So that is true story.
That is so funny. Oh my god. Well, I'm bummed I didn't see you when you were out, but you know.
And I was in Richmond last fall.
Were you?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, yeah.
How far are you from Richmond?
2 hours. I drive through it on my way to work. I work 3.5 hours away from my house, so.
I'm assuming you don't commute every day.
No, I go every other week. Stratford Hall is a 2,000-acre plantation with guest housing and all that. So, and that place is haunted as hell. I'll just say that.
No Barbie toilets.
No, like bed shaking. It took me a long time. I have to drink a lot and put on sleep machines and just kind of like pray through the night whenever I sleep up there. But
Oh no, fuck that. I've stayed in some, again, this traveling and playing in places and staying in places. I definitely stayed in a house that I know I saw a person walk by me and I thought it was a well, it's a different story.
Yeah.
But I want to wrap this up about your book. That I found this. I don't. This might be from the inside of your book, which I thought was really interesting. In grocery store aisles and kitchens across the country, smiling images of Aunt Jemima and other historical and fictional Black cooks can be found on various food products and in advertising. Although these images are sanitized and romanticized in American popular culture, they represent the untold stories of enslaved men and women who had a significant impact on the nation's culinary and hospitality traditions, even as they were forced to prepare food for their oppressors. Recently Dave Chappelle was on Saturday Night Live,
Yes.
and they did, the first skit they did was recalling Aunt Jemima and Uncle Ben.
It was so good.
It was hilarious. I don't watch Saturday Night Live.
Same. That was the best I've ever seen, maybe since like Eddie Murphy was on. So.
There's a class. Well, you were gone by the time he got there, but there's another guy from Albany that actually was with Chappelle, and he opens for Chappelle sometimes.
Oh,
he's a
shit.
comedian as well. So that was hilarious. How did you feel about when Jemima was finally, she's off the shelves, right? Because they gave her a perm for a while.
Yeah,
right?
no, she had a perm for the last couple decades. But and I think they're just kind of selling the rest of her image off, and they're not going to continue making boxes and bottles with her face on it anymore.
Does that mean anything to you?
It's twofold. I mean, on one hand, it was such a reactive thing to do. And, for somebody like myself and you who think about race and oppression, all the time, it was kind of gross to me that it took, this particular summer with George Floyd, et cetera, to get these companies that have literally been benefiting off of this racist imagery, off of African descendant people, particularly enslaved laborers, for over 100 years. It took that particular moment to get them to stop. And for me, it was reactive in a sense of it's going to hurt our bottom line numbers. COVID's been going on for a while. People aren't buying as much of my pancake mix, and oh shit, now we have to take her off. So for me, I thought it was it was a big move on their part because it was long overdue. But I also felt like if they were doing it for the right reasons, they should have dealt with that a long time ago. So, for me, I was kind of, I rolled my eyes pretty hard at that when it happened. But, it is what it is. And she's now off the shelf. And I think that if it was a Black-owned company, it would be a very, very different conversation.
So do you think that she might return because we have now a Black female vice president? She might return with a perm, but with a business suit and a briefcase?
I don't think so. I think Aunt,
think she's gone?
Uncle anything is gone at this point. And I think that at some point, it needs to, I don't want it to go away and then never to be discussed again, but I think it really shouldn't be sitting there staring at you on the cereal aisle at Kroger or Safeway.
Regardless of what it's wearing?
Yeah, I just, right. Yeah. I mean, seriously.
Regardless of the hair, maybe we can be a little light skinned,
yeah, exactly.
racially ambiguous.
She'll be, Aunt Jay or something instead.
Yeah. No, that's still no.
Still a little funky. That skit though, I was in tears laughing. It was so good. It was so good.
It was hilarious. That was one of the funnier episodes I've seen of Saturday Night Live. So is there anything else that you are doing something else before we go? You are doing something else. You are doing something out here in California, Berkeley.
Yeah, I'm doing a lot of other things. So there's two main projects I'm working on right now. One of them, and I actually can't, I think due to my contract, I can't speak about this in detail, but I am working with, you can probably infer, working with a celebrity chef who has a restaurant in Oakland on a cookbook. And it's about African-American food in California. And I'll just say that. And I'm very excited about that. And we're starting that project right now. So it should be out, I think, by next year. And then the other project that I'm working on right now is with my nonprofit. My nonprofit's called History, Arts, and Science Action Network. It was established 4 years ago, actually, when I was working with National Geographic on the Nat Turner project. I met a man named Justin Farnall, who is equally as passionate as I am about restorative justice and issues of racial reconciliation. So we started a nonprofit that's literally dedicated to repatriating objects, whether it be human remains or, items that were stolen during colonization or stolen for things like Yale's Skull and Bone Society. And the first thing that we did with this, and it was before the nonprofit was actually established, but Justin talked the guy that actually had Nat Turner's skull into giving it back to the descendants. And so that was kind of our first informal movement action, if you will, with this nonprofit. And now we are working with two governors, the governor of Maryland and the governor of Virginia, as well as the DC mayor, on a really gigantic gravestone repatriation project. So in 1960, there was a very predominant African-American cemetery in Washington, DC. And by predominant, I mean it had 37,000 people were buried there. And of those 37,000, they had people like Elizabeth Keckley, who was Lincoln's seamstress, people that were, in John Brown's raid with him, as well as Frederick Douglass's sons. So these were some of the most important Americans, if not just that, but even African Americans during this period. And they were buried there. And in 1960, they wanted to build a bus station. The city did. And so as they did back then, and actually continue to do now, it's a different show, different, long conversation, but they bulldozed the cemetery. They took the headstones and they gave them away as riffraff, and they took the bodies and they repatriated them to a cemetery in Maryland. The bodies now are in Maryland, and they are, some of them are marked, some of them are not marked. And the headstones were dumped on a private land beach on the Potomac in Virginia. And we are taking those 37,000 headstones and bringing them back to the bodies through work with the descendant community. So I'm working with the Douglas family, with the Hart family. William Hart was the founder of Howard Law School. So again, a lot of these very prominent early African-American families, their descendants are working with us to help fix this historical wrong. So that's one of the big beasts that I'm working on right now, is getting those physical headstones back to the families and back to the remains.
And there was a front page news article about that, right?
Yeah, I was on the front page of Washington Post. And funny enough, tomorrow we were supposed to have this big meeting with what's his name, Governor Hogan from Maryland, who's a Republican, Ralph Northam is the governor of Virginia, and Mayor Bowser from DC. We were supposed to have this sort of handoff ceremony at the gravestone site tomorrow, but because of COVID, it has been postponed. So that the news on that is going to be set to a later date. So there'll be more front page news articles and some CNN reporting on that in 2021.
Oh, damn it, COVID.
I know. Just fucking up everything, but
Well, it sounds like you're living an awesome life and doing awesome shit. And I'm actually glad to see that, because
thank you.
Again, you were the first person to greet me.
Oh, that's awesome. And it's good to be back in touch with you. Like, besides just Facebook, actually hearing your voice for the first time in 20 years.
Yeah. 20 years. I passed by whenever I pass by that house that you stayed in.
Oh, on Key Route.
Yeah. I always go, oh, that's where Kelley Deetz lived.
Oh.
My girl was like, who the fuck is Kelley Deetz? I was like, don't worry about it.
She's my first friend at Albany.
Yeah. These aren't the droids you're looking for. Don't worry about
exactly. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. And anytime you want to have me back, I'd love to talk any of those topics or others.
You say that now, but I will definitely
this is just
hit you up.
Last conversation that I would be having with a friend on the phone anyway. So if you want to record it, I'm down.
Well, what you have to do is you have to, because I have to try to get presentable. Every Tuesday I do a live stream.
Oh.
9:00 your time.
Okay.
And it started as just a thing, and now it's becoming a bigger thing. And I actually have to, take the boogers out of my eyes. My child still runs around as I do it. I have to keep it somewhat real. There's no more sets. So you see a 2-year-old running around every so often, and he gets on and says his piece.
Oh.
But It is. So if you're down to come back,
No, definitely.
I would love to have you on the live stream.
Definitely. That sounds good. I'm all about it.
We could see your PhD hair.
Hey, there you go.
So I'm going to play some music. Don't hang up.
Okay.
As we sit and watch the death march of capitalism's last stand, behold the truth of this exploited nature.
That was a lot of fun. And what you guys heard in that conversation was usually what the off-air conversation sounds like. That was very loose and fun talk with a very bright young woman that is doing some amazing things. There are links to everything that Kelley has done in the description, buy a link for her book. Also, please, if you haven't already done it, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Every Tuesday, we are doing a live stream with special guests. The topics sometimes are from the show. It's like an extension of the show in a more, I don't want to say heated situation, because usually the conversations are generally, this isn't Crossfire by any stretch of the imagination. But the live stream has been a lot of fun because you guys get to interact. So whenever you're hearing a conversation like you heard today and you want to throw your 2 cents in, you want to make a joke, my mom is always on the stream. If you want to interact with my mom, as people did a little while ago on the stream, feel free to do it. It is a very fun community that we're building through these streams. There is a link to all of the social media where you can watch the stream: Twitch, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. So please hit the subscribe button on YouTube. We're trying to get to 1,000 subscribers by the end of the year so we can monetize the YouTube channel. And if you have the ability and you're in a giving mood and you want to help the channel grow, then please become a patron. You'll get bonus content from a lot of the shows. There's merchandise we send patrons. And it's just, you're helping the show grow. You're a part of this wonderful thing we call This is Revolution Podcast. So thank you guys again for checking this out. And we will see you soon.